I've been doing this for a long time. Okay, here we go. So we're doing Preach With You 2023, Preach With Me 2023. We could call it that because it would rhyme. And we agree with John. We're going to get through 6 sermons today. The sermon starters for 6 sermons for our first kind of micro series within the year-long theme of I Agree with John. And so this is going to be meeting Jesus again for the first time, or at least that's the working title. But everything could change right now as we brainstorm together. Are you guys all on the document? You've got it. It looks like we're there in the notes. Thank you for that. So you can get on that document. That's your document to change. Don't delete it. If you're gonna, you can copy and paste onto a new document to make your own sermon from the sermon starters that we developed today. And then as we get closer, and obviously we won't be preaching the first sermon for this series until January 8th. And so we've got a lot of time to add things to this. And I've read John a few times this week and gotten prepared, but I haven't gone through a lot of my commentaries, and I think what we talk about today will spark so much for us. So there'll be plenty of time to add depth and richness to all of this. But a few things just overall for the whole series I wanted to put before you guys and kind of give you updates on. First of all, there's the podcast, which if you haven't checked that out, you're going to want to find a way, and I'll make a flyer for it, and there'll be flyers that Damon and Ivy Brogue did there in Wisconsin. And they they had quiet times together. It's like the cutest married couple, church leaders, and they have quiet times through the book of John. It's so perfect to accompany this series. And it was before this even started. So totally something to check out. They're awesome. We were just at our Midwest retreat and I shared a room with him, and he snores really bad, but other than that, flawless human being. The other thing is the scripture journals. Did anybody else order scripture journals yet for your churches? Are you planning on doing this? You got them, Rusty? Let's go. So you could have people order them, give them the QR code, give them the link in an email or whatever. There's 2 different kinds. They were on sale for Black Friday, half off. And so we got them for the whole church. You can have, pick the kind you want. They both have the same inside. This one has little tattoos in it. But what a cool thing for people to have their own quiet times with, or even to follow along in the sermons. And then we ordered this too. This came really fast. I was surprised. This is just a little pocket Gospel of John. It doesn't have the chapters or verses or anything. It's just the text of the Gospel of John that people can read. And on the back, I got stickers, slapped a QR code on there to get to iagreewithjohn.com. And so for our church, I want to have the goal next year that 1,000 people get these. And then out of 1,000, I don't know how many people will scan that QR code, but I don't know about you. I can't resist a QR code when I see one. I just got my phone out all over the place. Actually, I'm sick of them, but hopefully it'll be helpful and it'll be good. And then we got the store. I actually have a t-shirt coming today, but it's not here yet. But the stickers came in. And so that's going to go on a laptop near you pretty soon. So that's some of the tie-ins. It's on iagreewithjohn.com. For that website, I would love feedback on it. I feel like it's too long. I want it to be shorter, more powerful, but that was a first draft. Let's just put a website out there. So the QR code goes to something. I added a couple of icons to the first page today, just to kind of get a view of what it would look like with a little more graphics and not so stark. I'd love to add testimonial videos to the website. So people in your church could say, yeah, jump onto one of the things in there and talk about how John impacted them, or why they believe that Jesus is God and things like that. That'd be really cool. And I appreciate the feedback you guys have already given me, changing Redbubble to merch and stuff like that. And I'm trying to be responsive with all those things. So any questions or ideas in terms of just overall tie-in stuff before we get into the actual brainstorming for these first 6 sermons? Questions or ideas? All right, maybe we'll think of stuff as we go. So, but it's cool stuff. And at least I think I made a flyer, and I need to update it, the QR codes. so that even if you just want to print out that flyer to get people to podcast, website, merch, whatever, it's good stuff. So, okay. So when I put this together, oh yeah, go ahead.
So I thought of a question.
Good job.
For your, I got you. For your church theme for the year, obviously the preaching theme, the preaching series is I Agree with John. Are you rolling out with a different theme for the year? Hey, this is our focus, or is it all I Agree with John, that phrasing?
We're doing I Agree with John all year. That's the church focus too, and so because there's going to be like I'm planning on wearing my t-shirt and all that stuff. So it'll be a pretty good theme. We had Rooted this past year. I think all of you guys or maybe most of you guys participated in that. And so I'll have to take a picture and send it out to the group. Nobody used Band, but I'll send it to you guys, where we had the plant growing, and then we put each sermon series around the plant as it grew. And it was good that something in our church grew. So it was good to have that plant. But it was cool, like just to see all the different series that we did and kind of keep it under that Rooted theme. And then so something similar on that wall that we have at our church building with the I Agree with John series is what I'm thinking. So yeah. Any other thoughts on that, James? Cool. Yeah. If you wanted to do something more like, I don't know, I Agree with John is not very like grow, like let's go move forward kind of thing. But I think my heart with it is that just by really diving into the gospel, it is going to help us grow in a really amazing way. So giving people the gospel, come on. All right. So I came up with this from the first 5 chapters, meeting Jesus again for the first time. Kind of like I think the Jesus I Never Knew, Clancy, that's taken, so we couldn't do that. So meeting Jesus again for the first time. But I think that John kind of shocks people right away. Like this is who the Savior, this is who he thought the Savior was going to be, and this is who he really is. And I think our churches have that same mindset today. We think we know Jesus, but if we really come into John with fresh eyes, we get to see so much more. So are you guys good with that? First of all, does that seem like a good, when you read through John 1 through 5, did that seem good, or does somebody want to suggest an alternative theme? We're good. Okay. And then what does it mean to you, meeting Jesus again for the first time, as you think about those first 5 chapters in John? Any thoughts on that?
So I think even an illustration about like how, you think you know somebody, and then, this happens in real life, and then you find out something about them. You've got a friend, all of a sudden they break into a British accent or something. You're like, I didn't know you were British. Not that it would be that drastic, but so you learn a fact about something and it completely changes what you think about them.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. I'm taking notes here.
Yeah. I just think it's so easy for our view of Jesus to be stale and, feel like we have him figured out. And that's, in a lot of ways, the stance of the Pharisees, that they thought they had him figured out. And so it blinded them to some of the miraculous nature of Jesus. Yep. But I also think it's very popular right now for a culturally satisfying version of Jesus to come forward in media. And I think this idea that we can craft Jesus in our own image is a real thing. And so going back to the source and, okay, I want to see this Jesus the way that he is meant to be viewed. And so the Jesus I never knew, or getting to know Jesus for the first time, gets back to the source, which I appreciate a lot.
That's awesome. Okay.
I was reading John 1 this morning in association with the Adventure book, Quiet Time book, because we're doing that. Thanks for that too. And just thinking about how confusing a passage John 1 is, and it's like really mysterious, and we like to preach it like we know exactly what it means, but it's actually sort of more intriguing if it is sort of mysterious. And so I think being okay with the mystery of Jesus and just sort of getting to know him as a process. Like, what does it mean to me that Jesus is the light of life? And how do I apply that today? I think that's just a really interesting question. And so I don't have a great sermon theme around it or anything, but it's just the idea that we don't know Jesus really well, no matter how long you've known him, and there's always more to learn about him.
Yeah, I love that. This is so cool. We're gonna preach so much better because of this. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
So I think with this being the first sermon in the whole series, we also need to identify John. If the whole year is going to be, I agree with John, and there's a really easy way to do that with 6 through 8. He's a witness to testify to the light, and so you can kind of frame the whole agreeing with John through that verse. Everything that John says, everything that we're going to study this year, everything we're going to learn this year, it's part of a testimony to this light. It's part of a testimony to who Jesus is. So I think it's a nice little introduction to the series and John. But then what is it that John was doing with what he was writing? He's pointing us back to Jesus. So I think that's a important little piece of this sermon too.
That is really good. That's good. That's great. Okay. I love that. I'm not quite at the first sermon yet though. This is still just the overall theme, but I wrote that down there with, we'll get into the sermon in just 1 second. For like, in terms of like the graphics and PowerPoints, I think we need to develop those after we get more of the, after this session today. But just real quick, who is good at making who feels like I'm good at making PowerPoint templates and I would like to do that potentially for this series? Anybody want to jump on that? I can do that for this series. And then does anybody feel like good at doing Instagram or Facebook templates? Because we should do that stuff, right?
I feel like in one of these ways I can try to help. So whether it be slides or that stuff, put myself out there first.
Anybody else? I know that's the reason why a lot of you guys are here, is because you like to get those things.
My wife is really good at creating, I don't know, template's probably not the right word, but she does all of our logos and different things like that and does a very good job with it. The word template throws me off. Like, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but in terms of creating logos or creating pictures and all that, she's pretty good with that.
Yeah, that could be great. It's like a template. I just mean like it would be a PowerPoint that with like PowerPoint backgrounds or social media backgrounds that you could add your own stuff to. So, yeah. So basically, if you can use Canva, are you good at Canva? That's the question.
It's my wife. We don't use Canva, but she's probably could figure it out.
All right, that sounds good. I like it. Okay. And then you guys can kind of see, I put it in the email there as we get into this first sermon here. The template is we really want to stick with, I think this honors the theme and it's important to be congruent. And also because if we're going to collaborate with 10 people, it can't be all over the place. So we need to focus our expositional preaching. And so the focus is really answering this question with each sermon and then diving into the text with this question: how did John introduce his readers to an unexpected Messiah? What was he trying to show us about Jesus, or what was he trying to show them about Jesus that was different maybe than what they expected? And then we can cross that bridge to how is it different than what we expect or what we think we know about Jesus. And so to do that, identifying a key concept or a passage. And then what we'll do here is we'll go through each message and talk about those things. And then we'll identify one good point for the body, like, and I got the analogy there of a boxer, like the body blows, you're just wearing them down. And then you get the introduction and the conclusion. And that's how to work. So that'll be the flow with it. So with that in mind, we'll jump into the first message, and we don't have a title, but the title comes later. That'll come out of this. But it's John 1 through 14, just the introduction to the whole year, which you could do separately, but it could be part of the sermon. and then also the introduction to meeting Jesus again for the first time, the January and February theme. And so Josh talked about it being, you know, answering the question of who is John, which is really good, since we're going to hang out with him for the whole year. And I think we'll get into that in a lot of the sermons. We'll talk about Jesus and John, probably more than we normally do when we talk about, I think we do it with Paul, but we don't really do it with Matthew, Mark, or Luke as much. Maybe Luke a little more because he's the we in Acts, but with John, it'd be cool to do that. So what do you guys see? What do you think John does in these first 14 verses to shake up our ideas about who Jesus is? And we'll try to I'm going to try to keep it going pretty speedy. So
I do think it's hard to get away from how many times he references light.
mhm.
And that's important. But I do think he is also setting the foundation for who Jesus is. Like he was there from the, like he starts in the same way as Genesis. He is connecting Jesus to the divine, you know, of course, verse 14, full of grace and truth. I mean, there's a lot of different sermon titles you can go in there, and I think there's several concepts that are available to us.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing about light. I mean, light was just all over the place. And I think in that kind of confusion of John, you know, that mystery of God, as it brings us back to creation, that should stand out to us. Like, okay, I understand creation because I've been taught that as a little kid, you know, as the readers would understand. And God had this order, but when I look out at my life and the world, it looks like chaos. It looks like darkness. And here comes, they go, okay, well, all of this was pointing to Jesus. Jesus is this light that brings light to the world. And he's the one that's going to kind of create order in this chaos. And it's all like, we can't miss Jesus because people are missing Jesus at this moment. It's like, we can't miss this. So yeah.
I like that. You can't miss Jesus because of the light. That's good. Yeah. I'm seeing the notes here about John the Baptist too. Good stuff. What else?
I think if I can jump in. So it feels like John is really intentionally setting a stage to me. Like he's really, like this is a preface. This is the prologue that he's building this case that this isn't just a better version of a human being. Where, you know, he didn't even want to start with the genealogy. He didn't want to start with the birth. He wanted to really let us know by setting this stage that this is the fullness of God that we're talking about. This is not just an amazing human being. This is the fullness of God in the flesh. He's really, it feels like he's really hitting that home and telling that story and kind of building tension. And then, you know, later you see examples of what he's talking about, but he's really trying to set the stage, I think, to let us know we're not just talking about an awesome human being. Like, don't dumb God down to be Jesus is just a better version of you. This is the fullness, all of God in this person. So
Yeah, I love that. I think along those same lines, if you look at the beginnings of the different gospels, and so like Matthew, the very beginning of the New Testament, the Greek there is it's like the Genesis, genealogy and Genesis are the same word. So it says the Genesis of Jesus Christ, which is a super bold statement. It makes sense that would be the first book of the New Testament, first line of the New Testament, since Genesis is the first book of the Old Testament. But then what John does is he quotes Genesis chapter 1 in the beginning. And I like to kind of just paint the picture of how the gospel even would have been transmitted. Like John probably went around to the churches and, you know, in these houses just packed with people, and they heard that there was an apostle coming to town, and John is coming to town, and then John starts to tell people about Jesus, and he starts with in the beginning, and everybody, you know, from a Jewish background would have known what was next. You know, God created the heavens and the earth. but then he says, was the logos, was the word was with God, he was with God in the beginning. Like totally, like that is like such a shock value thing to say with your first 5 words. It's so incredible. And so I think that goes along with what you're saying, Rusty, and I love the way that you put all that. Thank you for whoever's taking notes when I talk. That's super helpful. And then I think the logos too, that I don't know how much we want to get into that. That might be some of what Jameson was talking about with the mystery. But I do think just the simplest way to put it is just when you see a logo, like when you see a Nike swoosh or you see an Amazon box, you know what that represents. And so by calling Jesus the logos of God, John's saying that when you look at Jesus, you're looking at God. It's the representation of who God is. And I think that that's a super powerful way to do that. So any other thoughts?
I think to go along with both Rusty and Joel, I think it'd be really neat to just do what John is doing in parallel. Genesis 1, looking at Genesis 1, the idea of light and dark is all through there, and the separation of light and dark. And I can't remember who said it, but when we look at the world, it is dark, and that's confusing when we expect there to be light. But even in Genesis 1, darkness was over the surface. It was formless and empty. And so John is using the idea of light and dark as a theme throughout the book, and also in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, he says that. And in Genesis, it's like wherever light comes, the darkness and the formlessness disappears. And so, I mean, I think we could get a lot of airtime from that in John 1.
There's a resource. It's really, really simple, but the Bible Project they do like chapter by chapter kind of visual things. And the one on John 1, this is a lot of what they talk about. The word becomes human, but they draw a lot of comparisons back to, this is just John recreating Genesis. But anyway, so it's kind of a visual form you can kind of see it in. So it's a good little reference, but that's the main thing that they're kind of picking up on as well.
That's a cool thing too that we could include with, I appreciate that, Ryan, because we could include that with the podcast and all that if we're preaching chapter by chapter, and Bible Project has a chapter by chapter video, just sending that out on a Tuesday every week.
Sure.
Would be great. So I love that. I'm going to add that in here.
Yeah, a little 5-minute thing, and really good.
That's awesome. Okay, it's great.
I do think too he's going to revisit these themes, because in every chapter in John, at least the gospel letter of John, he has something about the divinity of Jesus.
That might be good to give people a heads up about that, as they read. Hey, you're going to see this in every single part. And I feel like those are some of the hardest parts to read, because they're not the narrative parts in the Gospel of John. That's great. I think the other thing with just the light theme that I had written down, which is totally like in line, it's really cool, like what you guys are saying, is that like when light lights something up, now you have a way of seeing and a path, because when it's dark, you can't see, obviously. And so it's not just that he's like, it's like a light, like this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, but we get to see God because of Jesus. We get to see the world in a whole new way because of Jesus. That's what light does. And so, are we seeing Jesus and God in a whole new way? So
can I piggyback off of that real quick?
Yeah, please.
I think it's fascinating that God wants so desperately to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like that his heart is like, I don't want to be in the dark. And it makes me think of a museum and how curated the lighting is, that they do all this research so that the right stuff is seen the best way possible. And I just think of God providing the right light to really see his character clearly.
That's so good.
Yeah, just that thought too. I was thinking there's a lot of in this first 14 verses, a lot of Jesus coming to. The light comes to the darkness. He comes to that which to those that are his own. He's coming into the world. There's a lot of he's proactive. He wants to be with us. And I think, we can easily flip that and think that we've got to make all the effort but yeah, I just think that there's definitely a theme there, that there's the light for sure, but there's this he's arriving, he's coming, he's on the scene, he's present. That I like a lot.
That's great.
Yeah, I think, with that, the verse 5 kind of talking about light shining in the darkness. Darkness has not overcome it. And I think this is I felt this strongly, and I think a lot of people feel this way, like darkness is lurking at every corner and waiting to take us over. And it's like, no, this is what light does. And I read different versions that talk about darkness can never extinguish it. Darkness did not comprehend it, did not grasp it, did not master it, could not overcome it. And just the power of the light, the power of the word that brings life. I mean, and we don't have to be afraid of this darkness. We feel like the darkness is so powerful, but the light is so much more powerful.
I love that, Carl. It sounds very Star Warsy too, which I love. But it's the truth. We feel like the darkness is powerful. That's so true.
I think if we're looking towards maybe a key verse, if we're going to stick with light, I do like verse 9, true light, as just like, the key phrase that pays in that, if we're going to go towards that theme.
I like that. And it would be a good way to start the whole thing off. True light, because that's what we're basically presenting all year long, is true light.
I like that it's succinct.
Yeah, that's cool. The one thing I think we haven't touched yet, and we got to go quick here, is by the way, I think this will be about a 2-hour thing. But you can, if you gotta go, you gotta go. But is new birth as well, and that's toward the end. And isn't it crazy that we had, like, no one has any control of their own existence. Like, you're just here you are, you had nothing to do with it. But that's not true in Christ. Now we have, and he says we have the right to become. We have this right to become, and we have to act on that through belief and responding to the gospel. But we have control over this existence that will never end, which is a pretty cool thing. So that might even be like something for the conclusion or something like that. But cool. So we've got the key. Maybe the key here, we have definitely keyed in on light more, and there's already more than a sermon's worth of insight that we have here. So that's very good. What do you guys think? So if we're kind of honing in on light, but some of these other concepts, do you see, like, what would be a good main point for the body, or a way to, like, maybe a couple sentences on true light, and then what some sub points might be? Any thoughts on that?
I do have a thought. So tying in, I think tying in verse 14 is important, because the fact that Jesus is light is good, but it's actually not the whole picture. It's not even the main point. The point is that with light you can see, and verse 14 says, and this is what you can see because there's light. You can see the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. So I think that's the point, that he's dwelling among us, and now we can see what we're supposed to live like, what God's really like. I don't know. I think that's the even bigger picture, in my opinion.
It's good. Any other thoughts? What's a good body point here? Maybe a good question. Like, what's the question that we're asking the church, to how they could see Jesus in a new way? I think one of the questions is just, is Jesus lighting up your life, or are you surrounded by darkness? And then
I
there's
think another way you could ask that is from verse 10. He was in the world, the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. So like, do we recognize Jesus, the real Jesus, or are there parts of him that we don't recognize?
yeah, would you recognize Jesus?
I think about, I'm kind of thinking a little bit about like ultraviolet light, which is not a seen light by us. And what if all of a sudden we could view ultraviolet light, like at the wavelength that it is.
All right, I just got some points here. The Holy Spirit just
Boom.
so verse 10, recognize. Verse 11, receive. Verse 12, the right to become children.
Oh man.
Believe. Verse 12, believe.
Recognize,
Believe
receive.
doesn't start with an R, Brian.
That's right.
You're right, it
Messing up
doesn't.
the alliteration, man.
I thought we were
Stop trying to
preachers,
put B's
Brian.
in there, Brian.
What's going on? I love it.
I need a B in there. I need a B in there. Come on.
It needs to be for Brian. Yeah.
Brian, yeah, Brian's love bees.
You could also go with the rhymes. You could go with the rhymes of receive and believe. But
What are the three again? Say that again for me, please, Jameson.
Recognize, receive, the right to become children.
Great.
But receive and believe also. That's a little too like Southern Baptist-y for me, like my roots as a child. So I don't know.
It's good.
then you need a third rhyming. Conceive.
Hey, that is
Receive.
Children born.
children born, conceived. Yeah, that's hilarious. That's good. And so yeah, if the first part of the sermon is about light, and then you really go into all the things we talked about with light, and then you hit that we need to, so we should recognize, and then we receive, and then what we get is this right. I feel like that's a sermon right there, brothers.
Yeah.
I like that.
And quick shout out to Phil. I thought that ultraviolet thing was really, really good, because it's kind of this interesting thing where it's like Jesus is this light, like nobody ever would miss the light, right? Everyone would see the light. And yet he keeps talking about, now people did not recognize it. The word, people didn't recognize it. The leaders didn't recognize it. So I like that ultraviolet concept of it's right there, but a lot of times people can't see it.
That's great, Ryan. Thanks for putting some legs on that one.
I've got a great story on ultraviolet, the power of it revealing stuff. We bought a cat house in Omaha, Nebraska years ago.
Oh, no.
And a guy came in with these ultraviolet lights and showed throughout the whole house his cat urine that was behind the paint was covered up, and it was incredible. So it's kind of a cool connection to how the light does reveal hidden sin.
And you did buy that house still?
We took a year to get out of that because they lied to us. So we were homeless for 8 months.
Oh my
It was a
God.
good story.
See, Arlie's over here just struggling at the Panera, like remembering his the cat house. Okay, that's great. Okay, so and then there's a space here, guys. So as you're working on these sermons, as you're having quiet times through the month of December and thinking about this stuff, where you can add more illustrations or add to the main notes there. But if you're on the document, you can kind of see how you can copy and paste this into a new document, turn it into a sermon, and we've just got the Holy Spirit working through 10 evangelists instead of just you on your own. So let's go on to the next one. Next one, the rest of John chapter 1. And so I've got some notes here, but we've got John the Baptist, more about John the Baptist. And one of the things that I kind of keyed on as I went through this was how often it says that the world did not know him. Among you stands one you do not know. John says, you don't know him. John says, I myself did not know him 2 times. Then he says, I've seen him, bore witness. Like finally he does know him. And then I think just the concept of, we don't know Jesus. And then how do you get to know Jesus? Well, Jesus says, come and you will see. And then early on, you've got this first discipleship moment where the new disciples repeat Jesus and say, come and see. And so those are some of the concepts that hit me off of this one right away. What do you guys see?
I also saw come and see as a pretty strong through line. This is an invitation into discipleship. Now we know who Jesus is. Want to come see what it's all about? That's kind of exciting. Taps into intrigue.
I love it.
I kind of feel like John the Baptist is the way John is describing now, not describing, but using John the Baptist to kind of continue what I was saying before, is that he's just reminding people that this John the Baptist is like, this is not just an awesome rabbi. This is not just an amazing human being. And I feel like he's still setting the stage, but instead of just John's narrative, now he's using John the Baptist to say, hey, you guys, this is what we've been waiting for, and he's not what you think. This is the fullness of God. This is from heaven. This is not from earth. And even Jesus kind of telling them, you haven't seen anything yet. Like I'm different than what you've seen. I still think there's some kind of setting the stage kind of thing going on. And he's really using John the Baptist here.
And I think that pattern reveals itself in the entire Bible. Whenever God is going to do something like this, he always prepares the way for the people to receive it. So I think that phrase, preparing the way, might be something that captures that thought.
Yeah, I think you see different people have like different ideas of, and we see Jesus, I wrote this sentence as Jesus is fully human. He's from Nazareth of all places, he's the Messianic king and teacher of Israel, the Son of God, who will die for the sins of the world. Because it was like, oh, Jesus is this guy, Jesus is this guy, he's this, he's that. And we'll see that kind of play out, that where you're a teacher, or you're just this, or you're, can anything good come from Nazareth type of thing. But it's like, no, like Jesus is all these things and more. So.
So I should have asked this question before, but because it's the kickoff of a new year, would you guys use anything that we've talked about to kind of tie into New Year's resolution or New Year, new whatever, or just kind of go right into John and not really worry, or not concern yourself so much with the new year? Or is there a hook with the new year that kind of pulls us together as well?
Yeah, I mean, for January 1st, we're not going to do something out of this series. Everyone's just going to stumble into church, I think. But hopefully not. But I do think that the first 5 chapters of John, having it be meeting Jesus again for the first time, kind of carries that newness idea with it. So it's a pretty easy tie-in with the new year and New Year's resolutions. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I think with this one, I think there's 2 parts to this section that I see. Is the first one is just getting people, even John the Baptist, admitting he didn't see Jesus, he didn't know Jesus, and he was like, I was sent to be the messenger, and I didn't know who Jesus was. And so really challenging the church, like, do you think you know Jesus? Like, is Jesus getting boring? Or are you looking to see Jesus with fresh eyes? So that's the first part, is just a challenge to be humble and see Jesus in a fresh way. And then the second part is, so if you do want to see Jesus in a new way, how do you do that? And the answer, I think, is come and see. You have to spend time with Jesus. And so I think there's a lot of ways that people try to meet Jesus that don't actually end up in them meeting Jesus, like being more religious, going through the motions, getting into doctrinal stuff, being a loner, like I'm just, just going to figure it out myself, and not doing it in community. And so that could be a good, even, beginning of the year reminder of, the best times you're going to spend this year are going to be the times you spend with God, if you're willing to come and see who Jesus really is. So I'd probably put it together just with those 2 points. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I do like the fact that it's the beginning of the year and you're like, we are John the Baptist, right? The disciples. And it works double function because this is also the call to any guest that might be there. We want to have that consistently. And so it's like, we want to prepare the way, but we're simply bringing people to come and see Jesus. And then Jesus is the one who calls them to follow him.
That's right. That's great.
Great basic stuff, but outlines well.
Cool. Any other thoughts on this section? One thing that's good about starting with John is it's not like we're starting with Revelation. So we could get our groove here as we go through some of John's, like John chapter 9 is definitely going to be a sermon about spiritual blindness, right? And so some of it is a little easier in the Gospel of John. So I feel good about that. If you guys have illustrations or thoughts, you can add them. Any other illustrations on this one that you can think of? Maybe even this would be a great time to have someone come and give a testimony of how, if someone's story is that they just started spending time with disciples and it changed their life, to be with brothers and sisters.
And maybe somebody said this already, but like in verse 43 and following through 49, the response from spending time with Jesus is you got to go tell somebody.
Yeah.
So Andrew went and told Simon, and Philip, Nathaniel, like, I can't wait to tell somebody what I just learned from Jesus. Like it affects you, it impacts you. You want somebody else to see what you've seen.
That's great.
Maybe you guys will remember there's a phrase that I'm going to butcher it, but there's, some people like to belong before they know. Some people like to know before they belong, or something like that.
Belong before they become. Something
like that. But you almost do something like that with the whole, some people want to see before they believe. Some people want, I don't know. I'm just something there.
Sounds good, Jameson. Thanks, brother. Awesome. Okay, let's and we'll need to think of some titles for these two, but like this one, the first one's True Light, the next one's Come and See. That would make sense, for sure. So let's move into chapter 2, the third message here. I think we're cruising along good. And so what do you guys see in John chapter 2? Where's my Bible? There we go. This is the wedding, and then the cleansing of the temple, which comes super early in John compared to the synoptic gospels. And I think that's maybe even a good thing to bring into that. So I can share a little bit, and I just went through and read it and took my own notes, and hopefully that's what we can do before each of these sessions, is have that. But I see a difference here, like, and I know it's cliche, so maybe there's a better way to say it, but religion versus a relationship. And so there's, like, I see in the wedding, even this is really cool. The first 4 words of chapter 2. It says on the third day. And if you read through chapter 1, there's no like this day, that day. There's no, like, that comes out of nowhere, on the third day, or it doesn't add up, right? And I think that it's there, just like in the beginning is how the first chapter starts. On the third day is a thing to think, okay, John is actually going to tell us about resurrection here. That he's telling us about third day stuff. And so there was a wedding. And that's what we're looking forward to at the resurrection, right? Is a wedding. And the cool thing is at the very end of the year, when we preach John chapter or Revelation 21 and 22, we'll come back to this, and everyone will remember that on January 17th, we preached about the wedding at Cana. It'll be so good. But I think this wedding, it shows this relationship. Like this is what, so when the Jesus that John presents goes to a wedding, and he values love, and he does this amazing thing that it's shocking and it causes wonder. It saves the best for last. And then he goes to the temple, and I think there's such a contrast there, where at the temple, it's transactional worship, it's abusive, it's not inclusive. People are going through the motions, taking advantage of one another. And so I see kind of as a big theme here, this religion versus a relationship. And I hate to use that cliche, but that's what I see. What do you guys see in this chapter?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going from the come and see, these next, few chapters are come and see, and Jesus is now showing, what he's doing. And I like what you talked about, kind of these institutions, and a lot of them were kind of some of these Jewish institutions that were not the light that Jesus was supposed to bring. They were, and Jesus was shining light onto it and saying, this is what it's supposed to be. And yeah, so I don't know. I was just thinking about that, with the a wedding and the temple courts, and as a rabbi, and going on with the sacred well, and all those things. Yeah.
Good.
If you want to avoid a different way of doing that religion relationship, I like that word institution. What if you did like something like individuals versus institutions? Like Jesus was concentrated on these very individual people, loving up on them. Other folks were all about their institutions, and real Jesus, the one who really wants to get involved in people's lives.
I like that.
One thought I had about this is it's interesting, but Jesus and his disciples are invited. That's kind of obscure
cool.
and unusual. Like you usually don't see that happening, where they are invited to that. So I think that says something about, he definitely had relationships, and he was part of the community. There's engagement there. People knew who he was. There's a lot more underneath that line if you give it some thought and dig into it. So
that's really cool. I've never seen that before.
I think there's a metaphor in the fact that he uses the water meant for cleansing and churns it into wine.
And then he goes to the temple. Yeah. That's good.
Something, sorry, as I'm in the car, I got kids, my wife works on Thursdays. But the idea that the wine becomes the best possible wine, and then Jesus is in the temple trying to help it become the best version of the temple. And so there's something about, like, with Jesus, things can be the best that they can be, and that's kind of his MO, is making things the best they can be. And then I always found this interesting with the temple. My understanding is, in some ways, you have the opportunity to talk about racism in this passage, because the outer court would be where the Gentiles are worshiping, and for them to be doing the money exchanging, it was less about money and more about, this is supposed to be a temple for all nations, a house of prayer for all nations.
Yeah.
And you are distracting the all nations people. And so there's something about, not the temple not serving its purpose. Same thing with the cheap wine, or the water has a greater purpose kind of stored up in it. So some thoughts.
I really like that. Just the Luke 19 version of the cleansing of the temple quotes Isaiah 56 verse 7, and when John quotes it, he leaves out all nations. He says house of prayer, but if you go back to Isaiah, it says house of prayer for all nations in the Hebrew. So maybe he was going off of the Septuagint. And then In John 2, he quotes Psalm 69:9, zeal for my father's house will consume me. And so I think you could bring in the Luke part that would be, and talk about the two different cleansing times. And then, but in both, he uses house. And so, again, that institution or religion thing is opposed even to what in the Old Testament, the quotes both use the word house for God, which is more relational, familial, having to do with marriages and weddings more than going through the motions of a ceremony kind of thing.
This is just a
Oh, go for it, Josh.
really quick thought. This is just a side comment, but if you keep on reading in Psalm 69, he says, "Those who sit at the gate mock me, and I am the song of drunkards." It's just interesting given the previous story.
That's good.
I think kind of with the Jesus bringing the best in Isaiah 25, verse 6, it says, "On the mountain of the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines." And I think that kind of goes with that being the best at last. I mean, this is what Jesus brings, and this is for all, it says for all peoples, the very best, the banquet that God gives us through Jesus.
That's cool. And I think that later in John, someone just kind of shouts out, "Blessed are all who feast in the kingdom of God," referring to that, which is a crazy thing to shout out at a feast. I did it at a pizza parlor one time and everyone was so confused, but yeah, it's that's cool. That's an incredible passage, that messianic hope.
Right.
John?
I think it's probably the heathen in me. But like I'm looking at these 9 guys on the screen. If you could do any miracle, if God would say, you can do anything you want today, like I would think that my responsibility, especially as John has set the stage to build this person up, this fullness of God, and now the hinge kind of swings and he's like, now let me show you how he revealed to the world that this is the Son of God. The miracle he chooses to do is turning water into wine. Like, I want to party with this guy. Like, I love that about Jesus. Like, he didn't go to the hospitals and heal all the people to say, I am God. I am the fullness of God. He changed stinking water into wine so that the wedding would be better. I want to hang out with this guy. Like, he just seems so stinking fun and relatable. Like what you were talking about, a lot of you, but Joel started it, I think, with the religion versus relationships. Like, that's somebody who wants these relationships to flourish. Like, he's not religious. He's not going to go do the expected thing with that miracle. He's doing something that's bringing these people together. That's cool. But
and with that, John is very intentional. Like, there's a lot of structure in the Gospel of John. There are 7 miracles. There's a reason there's 7 miracles. I believe there are 7 I am statements. Like, John isn't haphazardly putting this book together. Yeah. There's a thought. He wanted that story to be the first miracle, which I just think, yeah, that's what he wants to get that across, that he's a relational savior.
That's great. Yeah, I think some questions we could ask is just, is church, does it feel like a home for you? Is this a family? Like we say brother and sister, but is it really a family? Is it a marriage, and sometimes that can be a good illustration because it's, we have bumps in our marriages sometimes, and that's going to happen too. If it's really, when you're not fighting, sometimes that's the worst thing. You're just going through the motions and living in cohabitating. Instead of truly being married. I think those would be good questions to ask people, because I think it's really clear what John's trying to show. John's trying to show us that Jesus wanted intimate relationships between him and his people and his people with one another. What a cool sermon to preach. It's going to be so good. Okay, I'm going to move us on though to chapter 3, and then we can keep adding this. I do hope, we've got the text group And as I said, band didn't really work because it was an extra app, but we can text each other. And so if we're texting, on the daily, definitely on the weekly as we get closer to this, and through, in January especially, that'll be so good. It will help our sermons, help our churches, to have all these perspectives. So good stuff. All right, the fourth sermon, John chapter 3. This is Nicodemus. And then the most popular verse in the Bible over the past 5 or 6 decades at least, is in here. So what do you guys see in John chapter 3?
I think it's very interesting to talk with Nicodemus, the Israel's teacher, and he's confused, so you see that again, if you want to talk about like the light, like if the teacher is confused and not in the light of what Jesus is doing and trying to bring, then how much more so everyone else. But this is why Jesus is, the great teacher. But it's like what he's saying is, maybe to Nicodemus and to us, it's like, it's not just that we need like new information, like you need a better teacher to kind of teach these things. He was saying, you need a new heart. You need new life, you need new birth. And because of our sin and our selfishness, and we're caught up in that, but God loves us and gives us a new birth, a new chance at life.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. He comes in the darkness and he is in the darkness, if we're keeping John chapter 1 in mind.
I think that this chapter is, real importance for us in teaching salvation as well. And it's because it's so misunderstood, and especially for our younger crowd, I think, as here in, Missouri, you got Springfield in particular, you got Assemblies of God, you have all kinds of, religion, and it's very confusing if they are in another setting, public setting. And, so I think we got to drill down hard on teaching, what exactly is going on here, born of water, spirit, etc. Then emphasize that, they were baptizing literally into water here a little bit later in this chapter. So I think we cannot miss that opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that the verse that most people use for easy believism is surrounded with the entire plan of salvation, baptism, repentance with the light and dark, and confession. It's all right there in one chapter, which I think will be really cool. I agree with John. If people do that, and read the whole Gospel of John, it'll be so much easier to teach salvation when they study the Bible, because they've already seen it in one chapter, in John.
Yeah, Joel, you said, what did you say? Easy believism? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So, but I think that's what is trying to be nailed down here, right? Because who's he talking to? He's talking to Nicodemus.
Yeah.
And I think, I think he's calling Nicodemus to something, and in verse 9, he's like, how can this be? Like to believe what Jesus is saying is so ridiculous. And not just to believe what he's saying, but then to act on it and live it. And so I just say, to me, this is a powerful passage just for our churches. Like I like your whole idea of meeting Jesus for the first time. And here's Nicodemus meeting Jesus for the first time. And where does Jesus go? And it's like, go beyond the easy believism. So yeah, it's a super rich passage, but there's some thoughts there.
So good.
Another thought that can be explored, just in verses 1 through 21 in this chapter, there are 9 stark contrasts that John makes. Again, I think what Ryan was saying, John seems to be so intentional about his structure. And so light, darkness, above, below, spirit, flesh, heavenly, earthly, life, death, saved, condemned, love, hate, deeds done in God, deeds done in evil, those who believe, those who do not believe.
Wow.
And so that contrast, like there's no middle ground. it's such a sharp contrast that he portrays, that might be the canvas by which we express some of these things.
That's really good. Can you make sure we get all that written down in the document at some point, all 9 of those? That's great. I love that. You know, the thing, seriously, so when I read this, so the one thing that I think this could be, because I think we, you know, hopefully at this point, we'll have passed out a bunch of Gospels of John. There'll be tons of visitors. It'll be awesome. But I think that we have to look at ways that we're religious and we're missing part of this as well. And if I read through it, the thing I think, thanks, James, love you, brother, is, you know, we believe in baptism, repentance, believing, all of that stuff. But then when he describes the Spirit, he says that people who are born of the Spirit, you don't know which way the Spirit's going. You get blown around. You have this life that, like, it's dangerous. It's wind blown. It's wild. You're not really in control anymore. God's in control. And so I could like hear people in the church amening repentance and amening baptism, but then the Spirit's supposed to make your life look like someone who had a terrible hair day. Is that, you know, but we're totally trying to stay in control of our lives. And I think that that's where John the Baptist goes next with it is, you know, so how do we get a windblown, actually spiritual life? Is that I must decrease, he must increase, you know, he must become more, I must become less. And so I think there's a challenge for us in there as well. I know I'm challenged by that. Any other thoughts on this?
Just that there's this whole circle, right? When there's testimonies that are given, then a verdict must also be given. And so the testimony that is appealed to in chapter 1 comes full circle, verdict in verse 19. So to complete that loop for people could be helpful.
That's good. Can you write that in there, Josh? Thanks, buddy. Like I'm thinking about, like, if you get up there and just tell people, like, I want to tell you how to have more chaos in your life. I want to tell you how to have less control over what's going on. You know, it's like end of January, people are just struggling. But then, you know, show it in the scripture. I think that could be a cool.
I was just thinking a little bit about that, Joel, with verse 14 and the snake in the wilderness. Like, how bizarre is that, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, you want some shock value? Here you go. Yep. Moses is going to make this snake, and I want you to worship it. Isn't that an idol? So, but yeah, there's just something there about just that to me, I don't understand that. Like it goes beyond the Jesus that I know. And so, but I love how John parallels that with Moses in the wilderness and the snake and all that. But it's just, yeah, super rich. I could go on and on about John 3.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yeah, that quoting Numbers 21 there, the thing that's cool about that is that's part of the gospel that we maybe miss sometimes is, so in that story, the people ask for God to take away the snakes, and because they're biting people and they're dying because they complained, and God doesn't take away, like, that would be the obvious way to stop people from dying of poisonous snakes, would be to take away the snakes. But instead it's this bizarre snake on a pole. Look to the snake and then you will live. And it's, you know, right before John 3:16. This is the context of John 3:16, is that we live in a world where there is sin everywhere. There's poison everywhere, and God hasn't removed the sin, but instead he's given us Jesus up on the cross, that we can look to Jesus and be healed and have life. And so it's
got to be in the illustrations.
Yeah, it's so cool. You know, I just preached that like 2 weeks ago in our Not Grumbling series, though. So, but people need to hear it again. Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't quite hit this format, but Nicodemus is fun to follow. We're not done with him. And I think, you know, so many times the Gospels have this instant reaction. Oh my goodness, I believe, you know, boom, 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 boom. Nicodemus is one that it takes him a minute. like he's gonna show up again, and he's still with the Pharisees, and he's kind of sticking up for Jesus, and he gets rebuked. Like he's not an instant conversion. I don't know how well that preaches, because we'd prefer instant conversions, but I like Nicodemus in that way, and that he takes the full 3 years or however long from this one to the end. So there you go.
I think that's really good. That honors the text, Ryan, to keep in mind that he's not a one-shot wonder here, and that he does come around. He was so confused. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Any
Keep
other
at it, don't quit.
Right.
You know, that sort of, there you go.
So I feel like for me, for a format for this message is kind of like almost like buttering people up, like, hey, here's our whole plan of salvation. We love this, we know this. But then are we actually living a spirit-filled life? And then I'm thinking about those contrasts as well, because that's got to be what, John wouldn't want us to miss, that, to put 9 contrasts in as many sentences,
I do feel like Ryan's comments are helping me, at least in my mind, to think that we might be landing in a key concept there, just because Nicodemus is the example of the chapter.
Right. That's good.
And so like a key concept might be, like Nicodemus is in there because we're Nicodemus, but I don't know. That's not refined enough or succinct enough, but it's definitely something there.
Yeah, we're definitely like in the room with Nicodemus. That's who we're supposed to relate to there.
Something I've never thought really drilled into, but John the Baptist talking about rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice, but introduces that marriage relationship, and makes me think of trying to think of the brother who wrote the book recently, Better Than Wine.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But reading that book was just amazing, because he used the Song of Songs, right, and just how much the love relationship there is, and just like I don't know, that just really jumped out to me, that when we hear his voice, I mean, that panting, that longing, that thirst, that's how I've always explained our marriage with Christ, so it's kind of interesting. I never thought about that in John 3, about that being introduced in marriage relationship. So
yeah, and right after we get out of the wedding from Cana, right? So very cool. All right, that's awesome, guys. I feel like we've got talk about sermon starters. We got them. It's happening. Let's go to sermon number 5, John chapter 4. We're going from Nicodemus, the religious leader, to a woman that Jesus shouldn't even be talking to, the woman at the well. And then what I'm thinking too, just structure wise, is I think I'll probably actually switch it up so that this sermon will be completely about the woman at the well, and then that 6th sermon will actually start with Jesus healing the official's son, because you've got those 2 healings. You've got the official's son, and then the healing at Bethesda with the guy by the pool. So that might fit better. So let's just focus on the woman at the well, unless it flows different as we start talking here.
There's a great study in the ICOC that maybe not everybody's familiar with, based on this chapter, called Worshiper versus True Worshiper. I don't know if you guys have done that one, but it's really a phenomenal study.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I never heard of it.
And because obviously in verse 21 is, or is it 20? No, it's 21. And it's just, every time it goes in line with most of the conversions in Acts, where they're called worshipers. And this is a really good explanation of what Jesus wants, what God wants is true worshipers who worship in spirit and in truth. That's verse 23. And her whole story, and even the fact that they've set up a fake temple in Goshen, right, in Samaria, right, that whole idea that they got a little mini temple there. You say we should worship here, we say we should worship here, and there's this whole copycat thing going on. And he's like, no, we want true worshipers, not just worshipers.
That's great. I think one thing I thought as I read this is just thinking about how thirsty are we for God, and having that maybe even as at the beginning of it, are we thirsting for God? I think what I was a quote. I'll butcher this, but when you're happy, you want 10,000 things, and when you're sick, you only want one thing. And so what are we thirsting for?
Ties in really nicely. We got another person meet Jesus first time. He's asking a lot of questions about who he is, like, and he's saying that for us to try to use a little narrative preaching through that and try to ask questions like
You were cutting in and out, Josh, a little bit.
oh, sorry, just saying, trying to use some narrative kind of preaching to bring the congregation along on a discovery that the Samaritan woman is going through could be a helpful lens for this sermon in particular, especially if we're going to put boundaries and just say, hey, we're just going to talk about her story.
That's good. That would be a good way to bring in the stuff about some of the Sumerian history that Phil was touching on there, which was really good. I like that.
Another good opportunity to talk about racism. Obviously, this is in our study series. This is our main passage for that. I think I was.
Oh,
go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna say, with back to the thirsting thing too, is that it just, obviously you could ask questions about things that we try to quench our thirst with that don't actually do the job. Those could be good questions to ask here.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about Jesus being the living water that brings eternal life. I mean, that's kind of the main point of that. And I like that. I mean, talking about thirsting, but then later on, he talks about food, they're like, because maybe I don't know what the disciples thought. They're looking at him like, okay, why are you talking to this woman? Why are we going to this? Let's not go this way. Because nobody goes this way. Jewish people don't do that.
Yeah.
They're like, you're hungry. You're just hangry, Jesus. Get something to eat. And he's like, I have food you know nothing about. It's the same thing. Like, I have this water you know nothing about. I have this food you know nothing about. Jesus is on a completely different plane with food and water than what we tend to be, just with our own thirst and hunger. So
along with that too, Carl, it's interesting because verse 4 says, now he had to go through Samaria. And all I could think of, if you know the geography, no, he didn't. And as a matter of fact, most Jews don't.
Right.
They go around.
Right.
That's cool. I like that.
I can't help but to think ahead, to John 6, when Jesus starts talking about eating of his flesh, drinking of his blood. And you see this starts out him being the word in John 1. And now we're talking about him, the living water, and, his food. And I almost feel like I almost want to jump to chapter 6 and just highlight that somewhere in the sermon 1, that he is, eat of his flesh, drink of his blood, because that's like what it's all about, the word, the Logos, etc.
Yeah, that's good. I think you can definitely wet people's whistle. What I'm thinking for the next for March and April is calling it the Jesus diet, and we will talk about food a lot, which is my favorite thing to talk about. Food and Jesus. It's going to be so good. So you don't want to steal your own thunder, but giving people a preview would make a lot of sense here. And that's the flow of the book. John must have been a foodie too. This is good. And then spirit and truth. Will you link that study you mentioned, Phil?
Yeah, I'll have to.
Jewish person. And then I do think spirit and truth fits with the last chapter, with getting the spirit blowing us around. Like I feel like we're truth people, and maybe even a little anti-spirit, or we're like, oh, that's just emotions, and a lot of times it is just emotions, because that's true. But are we spirit and truth, and what does it mean to worship in spirit and truth? That could be cool. That could be a cool place to have testimonies, or where you've got, like, you could use examples of someone who's like just a really spiritual person in your church. Honor them, and then honor somebody who just loves the truth, and even having the unity between those people, how the church fulfills God's picture of worshiping on the mountain. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, cool. And we'll do some more. We can send illustrations, thoughts, ideas as we get it going for it. So let's do the last one here. It's a really long Zoom call, but we're getting 6 sermons done. Let's go. So yeah, will someone correct that to the actual chapter verse that I got an anonymous buffalo and an anonymous ferret. I don't know who my buffalo and who my ferret are, but thank you for helping with the document here. And so what do we see in this chapter? This chapter is tough for me because it goes from narrative to really one of Jesus' first sermons in John. And I feel it's weird. I feel like Jesus' sermons are harder to preach than the stories and the narratives. Maybe it's because he's the best preacher. He's preached it for us, and we don't need to add anything to it. But I do see a contrast with the official's son. He's just the level of faith. It mirrors the faithful people who have healings in the synoptic gospels. Can you imagine, like, your son is dying and Jesus says, "Go, your son will live," and this is your last hope. Like, it's actually a stretch. Like, this is past your last hope. This is desperation, and you just have to take Jesus at his word and travel. It seems like it's a day's journey, and go back and see if your son is dead when you get home, or if he's actually alive. That's the experience that this guy has. That's incredible. And then it almost seems like the opposite with the man healed at the pool, which is like, do you even want to get well? And then he doesn't even say yes or no to that question. He just offers up excuses. But the crazy thing is, and I love this, is that both get healed, right? And so sometimes, and maybe that's where people in our churches are, or people who are visiting. They're like eager, fired up. They're like, I believe, let's go. And then other times we're just struggling, but Jesus heals them both. And that encourages me, because I'm not always the eager, fired up guy, full of faith. So that's one thought I had looking through this. What do you guys got?
I would like to make a suggestion. I think instead of breaking it down the way you're thinking, where you stop at verse 26,
Yeah.
I think because even in verse 42, we're still in Samaria. I would go 1 to 42 in chapter 4 and do that way, and then I would just skip the official son in 43 through the rest of the chapter, and then go straight to 5.
Okay,
That's just a suggestion, though.
that's great. Yeah, and I think if we were truly expository preaching this, it would be a whole year in the Gospel of John. We'd have to go a lot slower. So there are going to be passages that don't get as much attention or get skipped altogether. So that's a good suggestion. Do you want to expand on why or what you see there, Phil, how you'd organize this?
I just think, the disciples come back. They come back to him having had this conversation, and it just, there's a chance, because some people are the Samaritan woman, but some of us place ourselves in this story as the disciples, who are just as knuckleheaded as they ever are. And, but then the result is this miracle of a town in Samaria where many people become believers.
Yeah.
And Jesus does the unlikely, the miraculous, in a place where we would be like, we would be hard pressed to have faith and have high expectations for an entire city becoming believers through this woman who has a troubled life.
Right. And so you've got that back with the sermon we were on, with sermon
I
5.
do. In my mind, conceptually, that's how I have it.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, that's something that we definitely don't want to skip over. I love that.
You might want to break up his time in Samaria to 2 Sundays as well, just because there's so much in there.
There is.
Well, the cool thing is, so because and then when you get to Acts chapter 8, when the Samaritans become the first non-Jewish people to believe, it's Peter and John that go up there with the Holy Spirit. And so I think Samaria had a dear place in John's heart even later on, because he wrote this gospel well after his second time in Samaria, or the Acts chapter 8 time in Samaria. So that's good.
Might be good to remember that he's the same guy who wanted to call down fire and thunder on
Yeah,
these people.
that wasn't in Samaria. No, actually, yeah. Was it
Wasn't
Chorazin?
it?
Chorazin? Was it Was it the Samaritans?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
that's where he got the nickname Son of Boanerges. He wanted to destroy the Samaritans who weren't ready to believe.
That's incredible.
And now he's the apostle of love.
Right. Okay, so I'm writing down there's a whole town that believes because of this unlikely woman. Samaria, according to John, wanted to nuke them.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so if we get back to this last sermon here, John 4, end of John 4, John 5, we're really talking about, probably it's a sermon about the healing at the pool. Do you want to get well? And you could add in the healing that happens before that, or not. So there's a Capernaum healing. He's in Samaria, goes to Capernaum, and then he's down to Jerusalem. My man is traveling quite a bit. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you see here that Jesus takes a very intentional turn towards, kind of almost controversy. And specifically, he's talking about healing on the Sabbath. Like, that's such a big deal. Like, he did that purposefully in front of everyone to make a point, to kind of put himself in the middle of it. And I mean, you see, he kind of, there's these different festivals that he talks, tabernacles, and he talks about, these, where lost my page, but anyway, the Passover and all these things, even Hanukkah, he's talking about in chapter 10, but like, he's kind of putting himself right there, and he's getting himself in trouble all the way to the point of healing Lazarus. He didn't, he kind of purposely went back when they already wanted to kill him. They said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice myself for my friend. I'm going to, and that's when they, pretty much had him. So it was like, he's really now going back to kind of saying, here's why I've come. You see these miracles, you see these things, and now he's purposefully kind of pointing towards his resolution to the cross.
That's really good. What else we got, guys?
Hey, Joel, what would this would be this be on February 12th, this Sunday sermon?
Let me check. I think it can be, there's definitely room for it to be different.
Yeah, sure. If it's February 12th, it's 2 days before Valentine's Day. So
oh, that's cool. That's good.
I was chewing.
Yes,
I was
that's
just
what
chewing.
I've got February 12th. Yeah. So it'd be good to have a little love in there.
Love heals.
um, Good. I think there's significance with how he heals, like take up your bed and walk. There's always something with how the way that Jesus heals people differently every time, and what he says, instead of saying you're healed, he's like, get up and walk. It's like you've been almost like you've been laying here for so long. You need to take action. And I could see that as part of a charge at the end of this message. And I do think so it'd be good to work in Valentine's Day. Also, this is kind of wrapping up this first section of John. Whether it's even sectioned off the right way or not is up for debate. That's how we've got it sectioned. And so the question is, too, I think overarching is, are we seeing Jesus with new eyes, or are we more willing to see Jesus with new eyes because of these sermons, because of the chapters that we've read about John, or about Jesus from John? And that's maybe the source of the controversy that Carl's talking about. And I love just seeing that is that they're refusing, even with the messenger of John the Baptist, even with the miracles Jesus is doing, they refuse to budge on Sabbath and to see God with new eyes. And maybe after 2 months of preaching, our hearts will still be in that place too.
It's definitely an increasing hostility. And like this chapter turns up the heat on Jesus's ministry.
I wonder too, yeah, that's what if there had been reports that a Samaritan village believed in a Jewish rabbi, that he was the Son of God. That had to be an interesting day on first century Twitter.
I don't know if this is worthy or not, but I see these two miracles and I think about the number of people, even here in Toledo, that we've studied with, when they begin to study and their life starts turning around and their marriage starts to come together, and the children, their kids are doing better, and they don't need God anymore because they're fixed. And I wonder, you read about somebody like this, Jesus healed him. Do you still need God? Even as a disciple, I think it kind of comes back to what Joel was saying earlier. When I'm healthy spiritually, like I need 10,000 things. When I'm really struggling, I just need one thing. I just need to be close to God. And then when I'm fixed again, I don't need God as much. And I wonder, from reading these scriptures, do they still need God after they were healed? Did they still have that same passion for God after they were fixed? Do we still have that same passion for God when he continually blesses us abundantly? Or do we kind of go, good, I got fixed, thank you. That was awesome. This is kind of what I think when I
think it's really good. Yeah. And that, when I look at the red letter parts of this, which I think Phil or Josh put the 3 sections here, but there's that Jesus asked this question. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on Matthew or on John 5:44. And that's a question right there. He says, how can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? And that, I think that goes back to the whole concept of, are we seeing God? Are we seeing Jesus as God, as the only source of God and of what we need, or are we still looking to the world for those things? I think it flows, Rusty.
With the goal in this sermon to be getting through all of chapter 5, then is that correct?
I don't know. I think it'd be hard. I think it would be hard to preach the narrative of the healing and the 2 red letter sections. Maybe that's because we're just not seeing Jesus. Like we're not meeting Jesus again for the first time here, and seeing that. But that's,
something that's always amazed me about Jesus is, when he says, I can only do what I see my Father doing, and how often we just try to do Christianity on our own. I mean, even as a minister, man, I depend on myself all the stinking time and think that I can figure it out, or I need to carry the burden or whatever. And so it's kind of twofold. It's like Jesus, like, I can't do anything on my own. Only I can do what I see my Father doing, which then equates to really revealing the Father's heart, because you see how Jesus served, you see how he loved, you see how he walked, etc. So you get to really see the heart of the Father, because everything Jesus did was what he saw his Father doing. So that's always just made me think that's just incredible, thinking about the Father's love.
That's good. Yeah, while you were talking, that made me think of is like when we get to the red, like we've had all this narrative, and then we get to the red letter parts, and it's almost like we get to have an interview with Jesus, like a post-game interview, and they're like, okay, why are you? And the real question is, why did you just heal someone on the Sabbath, and why do people want to murder you? That's why we have the red letter section. But all of it, like what does Jesus think? What does he want us to know about him? And that's what we get in the red letter part, which is that he can't even do anything without God. If we're comparing ourselves, if we're looking for glory from the world in his life or in our lives, it's not going to pan out. It's good stuff.
Verse 31 almost reads like courtroom, because it's testimonies and witnesses.
Yeah, you could have an interview or a courtroom drama. Maybe you could give us some forensic science on that one, Phil, as we get closer to it. That's good. Okay, this is great. All right, so let's see. I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we just talk for a little bit about just this session. So thank you for tuning in.